It's said in ministerial circles that music before the lesson does one of two things for ministers. It either gives us a mountain to preach from or a hole to dig out of. And you, my friends, have given me a mountain to preach from, so thank you. Taquiasi.
What's that mean?
I behold the Christ in you.
I behold the Christ in you.
The question was, what does that mean? This is going to be an interactive session, I can see. Which always makes me feel more comfortable. These three greetings I just shared with you are greetings of reverence because they acknowledge the divinity within us. Namaste comes from the Eastern tradition. It's a Sanskrit word that the divinity in me honors and greets the divinity in thee. We all know that one. Mitakuyasan is a Lakota Native American word that means all my relations, that I am related to all people. And in unity, we say, I behold the Christ in you. And of course, we can't do that without first beholding the Christ within ourselves. So that's where we start with reverence today, is that reverence for ourselves, to know that we are divine. We are expressions of God, that we are here to be God's hands and feet and love and works in this world. And continuing in your tradition to have one of our own here at Unity of Naples share a few words about the virtue of the week, Matthew Schipper is making his way to the platform to share with you his insight on reverence. Welcome, Matthew Schipper.
Good morning, everyone. So I'm going to share a few thoughts on reverence, which is kind of comes across as a little bit of an intellectual virtue, but I think it's something that's really powerful, and it's something that if we give some thought to in our lives, you'd be amazed. You'd be amazed at what you find. And that's kind of my theory. So we have a definition up here: a feeling or attitude of deep respect tinged with awe and veneration. There's a mouthful. So I guess my point, my feeling is the awe, the amazingness, right? Do you remember being fresh in this world? Do you remember being a child and the wonderment, the magic, the beauty, how the simplest things were amazing? Do you remember being bowled over by something or completely just in awe of something that is greater than yourself? I do. I try to remember that. Having a wonderful 8-year-old energetic child also helps with that. So I think as we grow older and life shows us two words, the mundane and cynicism, we fall into these traps and we lose that ability to find magic and wonderment in everyday life, right? Because there's amazing in every day. You just have to look for it. You have to raise your perspective. You have to raise your consciousness to find it. So I'm going to tell you a little story, and there's going to be a little bit of a multimedia presentation. Don't worry, I'm not going to kill you to death by PowerPoint. You're welcome. So if you guys are year-rounders, which I think probably a lot of you still are, and if you're new and coming back as snowbirds, welcome back. One day, about a couple months ago, it was June or July, which in Naples, Florida is a wonderful time of year, and I was coming home from work, tired and kind of worn out, and trust me, reverence had left my body and my mind. I came home, and it was a rainy, hot, humid afternoon, and I went out to my backyard, and I was like, oh, this is kind of, I have a very nice backyard. My backyard's lovely, but it's not awe-inspiring. Not when it's overcast and rainy and dull and hot and a billion degrees. But something in the back of my head said, hey, look harder. Raise your consciousness, raise your perspective. And that's what I did, and this is what I found. So today, hopefully, I've reminded you that reverence is an act of virtue. It requires audience participation. You have to do it actively in your life. You have to seek the beauty. It's still there. It's still there. God's majesty, God's beauty, the amazement and the wonderment is still all around you. If you just take a moment, raise your consciousness, raise your perspective, and find it. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Matthew. In Chicago, in 1893, the first Parliament of the world's religion was held. And there were 7,000 people there. And there was a handsome, dark-skinned man in a saffron robe who gave his first lecture that day during that event. And his words were, "Sisters and brothers of America." Now, for some reason, I didn't get the same response he did. Because the response he got was that 7,000 people rose to their feet and gave him a standing ovation for 2 minutes. Simply by saying those words. And I imagine the reverence that he carried, the reverence that was in that room that day by this strange-looking man that many Americans were unfamiliar with. But what was it that brought that feeling of connection and love and power that made 7,000 people stand and clap for 2 minutes by those simple words? It was his connection to God, his connection to Spirit, and his desire to know that we were all one, even though we were from different traditions and different colors and different backgrounds, that his message was that we were all one. There were 2 onlookers that day in the audience. Our Unity co-founders, Myrtle and Charles Fillmore, were at the first World Parliament of the World's Religions. And the archives at Unity Village have this information. And the experience that they had was what they took back to Unity Village, well, at that time, probably 10th Street and Tracy. And they hadn't yet named the movement, and things were happening. But I believe it was this energy that led Charles Fillmore in meditation to come up with the word unity. And what he said about that and why he wanted to name it unity is because what they wanted to do was find the best in all religions. That was the foundation of our movement. And yet they were in a very Christian area in the Midwest. And so a lot of the Eastern teachings, kind of the term that was used in a book called The American Vedas by Philip Goldberg, was that it got whitewashed out because the people weren't familiar with the language and the culture. So, but what the Fillmores did was they were able to find that same energy in Jesus Christ, find that same teachings that they teach out of the Vedas and in the East through Jesus, through his teachings that we are one. I and the Father are one. We are one. I am the light of the world. You are the light of the world. So these are the teachings that we have today. Very influenced. Matter of fact, all the New Thought religions, Emerson and Thoreau, were very influenced by the Vedas and the teachings from the East. These are the teachings that help us become our sacred selves. When we remember who we are, of what stuff we are made of, and that we honor that in one another. But it's not always an easy experience, is it? The spiritual journey has its ups and downs. It has its bumps. It has its challenges. It's hard to stay on the beam. It's hard to stay on the path sometimes. But Carl Jung said, I am not what happened to me. I am what I choose to become. I am what I choose to become. And every great spiritual teacher down through the ages, and now I would say any even spiritual seeker, has had their challenges, has had something that shook them at their foundation, that helped them to wake up and to embrace the divinity within them. We know the story of Eckhart Tolle, who wrote The Power of Now, that he was so depressed and suicidal before he had a wake-up and wrote his wonderful books, and now we see him all over the place. Know the story of Byram Katie, who was on the floor because she didn't feel valued enough to sleep in a bed in a halfway house before she started doing her work called The Work. We know the story of Bill Wilson, co-founder of Alcoholics Anonymous, who was laying in a hospital bed wanting to die before he had a spiritual awakening, and has helped millions of people through what they created in the 12 steps. And this is also true for Jesus. Jesus had his time in the wilderness, right? And this was one of the last things that happened to him before he stepped into his power as a teacher of love. So we know these temptations. I want to go over them a little bit and give you my spin on them. And they were that when Jesus was led up by the Spirit into the wilderness to be tempted by the devil, he fasted for 40 days and 40 nights, and afterwards he was famished, I imagine. The tempter came to him and said, "If you are the Son of God, command these stones to become loaves of bread." But he answered, "It is written, one does not live by bread alone, but by every word that comes from the mouth of God." So first we know in unity that there isn't an entity of the devil. It is negativity. It is anything that is separate from God. It's an energy. So Jesus was facing his own shadow. He wanted to make sure he was clear with all of that before he came out to teach. And we also know that every word that comes from the mouth of God is the highest truth that comes from within us, our Christ consciousness, which he was in touch with, and he was making sure that he was in touch with this. So I call this temptation the call to integrity, because Jesus wasn't here to use his spiritual gifts for his own purpose, not to turn stones to bread for his own purpose, but to make sure that he was clear to serve others, to be an instrument of God's truth. So I call that the temptation or the call to integrity. And that's the way God works. Jeremiah 29:11 says, "The plans I have for you are to bless you and prosper you and not to harm you." So Jesus was anchoring himself in that truth. And then the devil took him to a holy city and placed him on the pinnacle of the temple, saying to him, "If you are the Son of God, throw yourself down, for it is written, He will command His angels concerning you, and on their hands they will bear you up, so that you will not dash your foot against a stone." And Jesus said to him again, "It is written, do not put the Lord your God to the test." I call this the call to a higher consciousness. One of the speakers this weekend at the Parliament of the World's Religions in Salt Lake City, where your minister is right now, is Reverend Michael Beckwith. Many of you have heard him, and I've had the pleasure to be with him many times. He said this at a lesson I heard on a Sunday morning. He said that God does not respond to need. God responds to consciousness. So in other words, yes, and I don't know if I agree with that 100% because I know I've been in need before and God has responded. Anybody else? Amen. But, sometimes the idea, and we teach this in Unity about our thoughts create our world, is that when our consciousness is elevated, then whatever it is we desire manifest. For instance, when we get our consciousness, a prosperity consciousness, when we know God is our source and that we lack for no good thing, then prosperity is our experience. When our consciousness knows that God is active in every cell and tissue and fiber of our being, then we express health and wholeness. When we know God's love in our hearts is the power that brings us joy and intimacy and goodness in our relationships, we manifest those relationships. So that's why we don't put God to the test. We don't ask God to do something for us that He can't do through us, or that she can't do through us. So we have to raise our consciousness. That's the truth that's why we're here in Unity, because we're here to raise our consciousness into that greater expression. I call that a call to a greater, higher consciousness. So I want to get this in before I forget anything else. I had an experience of reverence one day. A few years back, I was the president of the Eastern region of Unity Churches when I was serving a church up in New Jersey. And I was in the same region as your Reverend Diane at the time. Matter of fact, we were classmates. She graduated the year before me, so we were at Unity Village at the same time. And so I had the duty to select the keynote speaker for the ministers' conference in the Eastern region, and I called up Richard Rogers, another friend of yours, and he was our keynote. And Richard was leading us through a meditation, 60 or so Unity ministers and leaders, and my wife and I just had a baby, and there's a baby outside there, and Sophia was 3 months old. And we brought her to the conference. She's been to so many conferences. We are raising a lunatic. And Richard led us into this beautiful meditation. There was Sophia in the middle of the hall on a blanket. And she was doing that thing that babies do that bring the reverence up in our hearts. He led us deeper and deeper into the silence. And there's Sophia squirming and moving around on her blanket, cooing, and filled the whole room with this reverence. And when it was over, your Reverend Diane came over and put a love offering under Sophia's blanket. It was so special. It just shows me how much she is in touch with the presence of God, and how much you guys are in for it when she comes back from the Parliament of World Religions. The reverence she has is going to be multiplied, because she's there right now reclaiming the heart of humanity with thousands of people around the world. So I just wanted to share that, tell that little story about your reverend. The last temptation was that when, again, the devil took him to the highest mountain and showed him all the kingdoms of the world and their splendor, and he said to him, "All these I will give you if you will fall down and worship me." Jesus said to him, "Away with you, Satan, for it is written, 'Worship the Lord your God and serve him only.'" Then the devil left him, and suddenly angels came and waited on him. And God said, "You're good to go." And I call this the temptation or the call to accountability, which is something we need more of in our world right now. If we look around at what's happening to our environment, if we look at what's happening in politics, it seems that people aren't being accountable to the gifts that we've been given by God, this beautiful planet, how we treat one another. And so Jesus knew he was here to represent the one God, God the good. He wasn't interested in worldly power. He was interested in the power that brings us to love, the power that brings us to our knees for the beauty that this life has given us. Let's go to the next slide. So quickly, I'm going to go through the similarities because this thing I like to do, find the best in all religions. This is the Buddha under the Bodhi tree. The Bodhi tree is the place of awakening. And the night of his awakening, he was tempted and challenged by the same kind of energy that Jesus was. We call the devil in Christianity. And it was Mara. And Mara, let's go to the next slide. Oh, there we go. Here's Mara here on the left, this devilish kind of creature. And Mara said, okay, Mara used to come and bother Buddha all the time when he was meditating, whatever. He tried to knock him off his seat that he didn't want the Buddha to be enlightened. So the first thing Mara did was tempt the Buddha. And he tempted him with the newest Maserati. No, it would have been a fancy chariot. Or there were dancing girls and there was castles and things like that. And the Buddha was unmoved. Temptation didn't work. So the next thing that Mara used was aggression. He had his armies throw flaming arrows and spears and every weapon they could find at the Buddha. And the Buddha, in his centeredness, was able to touch the tips of each arrow and each spear with love and compassion, and each one fell to his feet and turned into flower petals. And again, the Buddha was unmoved. So Mara goes really deep. Now it's okay, temptation doesn't work, aggression doesn't work. Here's the one that gets us all. How about doubt? Who are you to be enlightened? Why do you deserve to sit under the Bodhi tree? Who do you think you are? And so Mara kept ragging on the Buddha. Who do you think you are? If you notice in this picture, the Buddha has his right hand touching the earth. He was cultivating his witness. Because what happened as he touched the earth was Mother Earth came up out of the soil. This is mythology, history, culture. And Mother Earth came up and said, I have watched this man for lifetimes. I have seen his integrity. I have seen his compassion. I have seen his wisdom. I have seen his consciousness. And I believe that he should be enlightened. So Mother Earth became his witness. And at that time, all the armies of Mara were swept away. We can go to the next picture. And then the Buddha was enlightened at that moment. So my point in telling you these two stories is that we all go through challenges that help us to step into our divine essence and the truth of who we are. I carry a chip with me. I'm on my 25-year of sobriety tour. I share this with you not because it's something to brag about. I'd rather not have to be a recovering alcoholic. But it's been my journey and is what brought me to my knees, that I would get a call to be of service to humankind, that would lead me to be a Unity minister, that would lead me to be here at Unity of Naples and to speak to you all in this beautiful congregation, this beautiful ministry you have. This is what happens when we're willing to face our shadows and face our addictions and face our challenges and get to the core of who we are, that divine essence, our sacred selves. So I'd like to end where we began, with the bow. The root word for namaste is namo, which means to bow, to honor. And there's 3 parts to a bow. The first is to become fully present. You know, I find myself sometimes, I got my keys in my hand, I got my wallet, something, and I'm bowing to people, and it's not very, not very connecting. So the first thing is to become fully present, to take a few deep breaths, whatever you need to do to center yourself in the truth of who you are. And the second is to feel your heart, to feel the love of God that you are. And the third is to actually bow. So I have the choir here, and this is where we're going to participate again. Well, we're all going to participate. So I invite you to, if you want to sit, that's fine. If you want to stand up, whichever works best for you. And with me, what we're going to do is chant Namo. 3 times I'll do it, and you just join in with me. And the first time we're going to do a mind, body, spirit. Mind being God, body being ourselves, the Christ within, and the spirit, the Holy Spirit. So we become present. Take a deep breath. We feel our hearts and the love of God. Namo. Body, mind. Namo. And spirit. Namo. God bless you.